The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital emergency room buzzed like angry hornets as Sarah Martinez pressed her stethoscope against the chest of an elderly woman writhing in pain. 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night in Detroit, and the ER was a war zone. 3 nurses covering what should be a 12-nurse shift thanks to Richard Blackwood's latest round of operational efficiencies. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision despite the exhaustion burning behind her eyes. This was her 3rd double shift this week, but the bills wouldn't pay themselves, and her 16-year-old nephew Danny needed school supplies. At 34, she'd been fighting this battle for years, keeping people alive while administrators counted pennies. The automatic doors exploded open with a pneumatic hiss that cut through the chaos like a gunshot. "Trauma incoming?" shouted paramedic Jake Morrison, his uniform dark with blood as he guided a stretcher through the entrance. 22-year-old male, massive blood loss from MVA, vitals crashing fast. Sarah abandoned her current patient to a colleague and rushed to the trauma bay. The young man on the stretcher looked barely older than Danny, his face pale as winter sky beneath the harsh lights. Blood soaked through his torn marine dress uniform, and his dog tags caught the light as they bounced against his chest with each labored breath. "What have we got?" Dr. Emily Chen demanded, her voice steady despite working her own marathon shift. Sarah had always respected Chen, one of the few doctors who treated nurses as partners rather than subordinates. "Corporal James Torres, massive internal hemorrhage from blunt force trauma," Morrison reported, transferring the patient to the ER bed. "Lost consciousness twice en route, blood pressure dropping fast. He's AB negative." Sarah's hands were already starting IV lines while Dr. Chen performed her assessment. The kid's eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused but fighting to stay conscious. So young, Sarah thought, remembering her own nephew at that age. Someone's son. Someone's everything. "We need 6 units of AB negative blood stat," Dr. Chen called out. Mark Stevens, the overnight blood bank technician, rushed to his computer terminal. His face went white as he scrolled through the inventory. Sarah watched his expression change, and her heart sank before he even spoke. "We're out," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Completely out of AB negative." The trauma bay fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors tracking Torres's declining vitals. Sarah felt the familiar rage that came when bureaucracy murdered hope. Another casualty of Blackwood's cost-cutting, the blood drive scheduled for last week had been canceled to save money. "Check nearby hospitals," Dr. Chen ordered, but Sarah could see the defeat in her eyes. Mark was already on the phone. "Metro General is tapped out from a 3-car pileup. Detroit Medical won't have any until Monday. Henry Ford is 40 minutes away, and he doesn't have 40 minutes. Torres's mother burst through the doors at that moment, still in her hospital scrubs from her own job as a nursing assistant. Maria Torres took one look at her son and began screaming in Spanish, then English, then Spanish again. "Por favor, save my boy. He's all I have. Please save my Jimmy." Sarah watched the numbers on the monitor continue their deadly descent. This kid had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan, according to his medical bracelet, only to die on a Detroit street because a hospital administrator thought blood drives were too expensive. Without hesitation, Sarah rolled up her sleeve. "Test me," she said, already moving toward the blood draw station. "I'm AB negative." Dr. Chen grabbed her arm. "Sarah, you know that's against policy. Direct staff transfusions were banned after the Henderson incident." Blackwood made it very clear. Liability issues, insurance problems, we could all lose our jobs. Sarah looked at the monitor. Blood pressure, 70/40 and falling. She looked at Maria Torres, clutching a rosary with trembling hands. She looked at Jimmy Torres, barely 22 years old, fighting for every breath. "Then don't tell Blackwood," Sarah said, settling into the donation chair. "This kid isn't dying on my watch." The room erupted in protests, but Sarah was already extending her arm. Mark hesitated with the needle, looking between Sarah and Dr. Chen. "Do it," Sarah said firmly. "Now." As Mark drew her blood, Sarah felt Jimmy's weak hand grasp hers. His eyes met hers, clear for just a moment. "Thank you," he whispered, barely audible. The direct transfusion took 23 minutes. Sarah stayed conscious through determination alone, watching Jimmy's vitals slowly stabilize as her own blood flowed into his veins. Her vision blurred, her hands shook, but she refused to leave until Jimmy was stable and Maria Torres stopped crying. By 2 a.m., Jimmy Torres was sleeping peacefully in the ICU, alive because one nurse decided that saving lives mattered more than saving face. Sarah Martinez had no idea she'd just committed a felony. Saturday morning sunlight filtered through the threadbare curtains of Sarah's small apartment as she fumbled for her keys with shaking hands. The blood draw had left her weaker than she'd admitted, but she'd stayed at the hospital until Jimmy was completely stable. Now, at 7:30 a.m., exhaustion weighed on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "Aunt Sarah?" Danny Martinez looked up from his cereal, concern creasing his young face. At 16, he'd already seen too much of life's harsh realities. His parents had died in a factory explosion 3 years ago, leaving Sarah as his only guardian. The responsibility terrified and motivated her in equal measure. "Just tired, my Joe," Sarah said, accepting the coffee Danny had made for her. The bandage on her arm was hidden beneath her sleeve, but Danny's sharp eyes missed nothing. "You're pale. And why is your arm wrapped up?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. Dr. Chen's number flashed on the screen. "Sarah, we have a problem." Chen's voice was tight with worry. "Blackwood's asking questions about the blood bank inventory. The computer shows a discrepancy. 1 unit of AB negative is unaccounted for." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "He's coming in today to investigate personally." Janet Kruger volunteered to interview all the staff from last night's shift. "Sarah, if they find out what we did." The line went quiet. They both knew what discovery meant. Termination, loss of licenses, possibly criminal charges. The Henderson incident Dr. Toomey to NT24, Chen had referenced, was a nurse who'd been fired and prosecuted for a minor protocol violation. Blackwood had made him an example. "We stick to the story," Sarah said quietly, aware of Danny listening from the kitchen. "We used all available blood for the trauma patient. Computer error." "Sarah, Janet Kruger isn't stupid. She's been looking for a reason to get rid of you since she lost the promotion to senior charge nurse. This is her chance." After hanging up, Sarah stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles under brown eyes that had seen too much. Graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. 44 years old and fighting battles that should have been won decades ago. "Aunt Sarah, what's really going on?" Danny appeared in the doorway, his expression too mature for his age. "Hospital politics, baby. Nothing for you to worry about." But Danny's expression said he didn't believe her, and Sarah hated lying to him. This kid had already lost too much family to adult failures. At St. Mary's Hospital, Richard Blackwood stood in his corner office reviewing blood bank reports with the methodical precision of an accountant finding tax discrepancies. At 48, Blackwood was everything Sarah despised about modern healthcare, an MBA with no medical training who viewed patients as profit centers and staff as expendable resources. His office reflected his priorities: expensive artwork, imported leather furniture, and a wall of corporate efficiency awards. Not a single medical degree or patient care recognition in sight. "Janet, I need you to investigate this blood bank discrepancy," Blackwood said to Janet Kruger, who stood before his desk like a soldier awaiting orders. "1 unit of AB negative blood is missing from our inventory. That represents a $500 loss and a potential FDA violation." Janet Kruger had been waiting for this moment. At 51, she'd worked at St. Mary's for 15 years without ever reaching Sarah's level of respect among staff. She compensated with rigid adherence to policies and an eagerness to report colleagues' minor infractions. "I'll interview everyone from the night shift," Janet said, barely containing her satisfaction. Sarah Martinez was the senior nurse on duty. She would know about any irregularities. "Be thorough, Janet. If we can't account for medical supplies, we could face state health department sanctions. I won't have this hospital's reputation damaged by sloppy staff work." Meanwhile, in the ICU, Jimmy Torres was awake and asking questions. His mother sat beside his bed, still clutching the rosary she'd held during his surgery. "Mama, where's the nurse who saved me? The one who gave me her blood?" Maria Torres wiped tears from her eyes. "She went home, mijo." "But she saved your life. That woman, she has an angel's heart." "I need to thank her properly. What she did, I've never seen anything like it." The ICU nurse, Patricia Williams, leaned closer. "Jimmy, you need to be careful about what you say. What that nurse did could get her in serious trouble. The hospital has strict policies about direct transfusions." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that could end her career. Maybe worse." Back at the hospital, Sarah faced her first interrogation. Janet Kruger cornered her in the break room during what should have been Sarah's day off. "Sarah, we need to talk about last night's blood inventory," Janet said, her voice carrying the authority of someone finally holding cards. "There's a unit of AB negative blood that can't be accounted for." Sarah sipped her coffee, maintaining steady eye contact. "We used all available blood for the trauma patient." "Check with Dr. Chen." She can confirm the usage. Computer systems don't make mistakes, Sarah. People make mistakes. And when people make mistakes that violate FDA regulations and hospital policy, there are consequences. The threat hung in the air between them. Sarah recognized the gleam in Janet's eyes, the satisfaction of someone who'd finally found ammunition against a rival. Maybe there was a data entry error, Sarah suggested. It wouldn't be the first time the computer system glitched. I've already spoken with Mark Stevens in the blood bank. He's being very cooperative about the events of last night, very detailed in his recollections. Sarah's heart raced, but her expression remained calm. Mark's a good technician. I'm sure he'll provide accurate information. After Janet left, Sarah sat alone in the break room, staring at her bandaged arm. She'd saved a life, and now she faced professional execution. The system was designed to protect administrators, not patients, and certainly not the healthcare workers who actually cared for people. At home that evening, Danny noticed Sarah's distraction. "Aunt Sarah, you look worried. Really worried." Sarah forced a smile. "Just work stuff, baby. Nothing I can't handle." But as she lay in bed that night, Sarah wondered if she'd just destroyed the only life she'd ever wanted, and the only stable home Danny had ever known. Sunday morning arrived with an unexpected visitor. Sarah was making breakfast when the doorbell rang, and she opened the door to find a woman in military dress uniform standing on her modest front steps. General Patricia Hayes was an imposing figure, 55 years old, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen combat. A younger Marine officer stood respectfully behind her. "Miss Martinez? I'm General Hayes, commanding officer of Great Lakes Naval Station. I believe you know Corporal Torres." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "Is Jimmy okay?" "He's recovering well, thanks to you. May we come in?" Sarah led them into her small living room, acutely aware of the modest furniture and Danny's scattered textbooks. General Hayes sat with military precision, her uniform crisp and decorated with ribbons Sarah couldn't identify. "Ms. Martinez, Corporal Torres told me exactly what happened Friday night. Your sacrifice saved the life of one of my Marines." "I just did what anyone would do." General Hayes leaned forward slightly. "No, ma'am. You did what few people would have the courage to do. You risked your career, broke institutional rules, and gave your own blood to save a stranger. In my book, that's heroism." Danny appeared in the kitchen doorway, eyes wide at seeing a general in their apartment. His aunt was a hero? The woman who made him do homework and nagged him about cleaning his room had saved someone's life? But General Hayes brought troubling news. "However, I've learned there's an investigation at your hospital. The administrator, a Mr. Blackwood, has contacted the state health department. He's pushing for criminal charges, theft of medical supplies, violation of FDA blood banking regulations, unauthorized medical procedures." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. "Criminal charges? Miss Martinez, the military community doesn't forget those who serve our own. But I need you to understand what you're facing. This could destroy your life." General Hayes left her contact information and a promise of support, but Sarah felt the walls closing in. After they left, Danny bombarded her with questions. "Aunt Sarah, you really saved someone's life? Why didn't you tell me? And why are they talking about criminal charges? That doesn't make sense." Sarah tried to explain without frightening him, but how do you tell a teenager that doing the right thing could send you to prison? At the hospital, Richard Blackwood had escalated far beyond internal investigation. Detective Mike Harrison from Detroit PD's fraud unit sat across from Blackwood's polished desk, reviewing a thick file of documentation. "Let me understand this correctly," Detective Harrison said, his gravelly voice reflecting 20 years of dealing with Detroit's criminal element. "You want me to arrest a nurse for saving someone's life?" "I want you to arrest someone for theft of medical supplies, endangering patient safety through unauthorized procedures, and falsifying medical records," Blackwood replied coolly. The saving a life narrative is emotional manipulation designed to obscure serious criminal behavior. Detective Harrison studied the paperwork. A veteran cop who'd seen every type of fraud imaginable, he found this case deeply uncomfortable. "Mr. Blackwood, I've arrested people for stealing medical supplies to sell on the street. This nurse used her own blood to save a dying kid." "Detective, regulations exist to protect patients and maintain medical standards. When healthcare workers decide they're above established protocols, people die. This isn't about one incident. It's about maintaining a system that keeps everyone safe." Meanwhile, Dr. Emily Chen faced her own pressure. Dr. Emily Chen, Robert Sterling, Chief of Staff and Blackwood's closest ally, summoned her to his office for what he called a career counseling session. "Emily, your fellowship application to Johns Hopkins is progressing well. I've been planning to write you a strong recommendation letter. Doctor, Sterling paused meaningfully. However, if you're involved in this blood bank irregularity, that recommendation becomes very difficult to write. The threat was clear. Support Sarah Martinez and lose her dream fellowship, or stay silent and advance her career. Dr. Chen had worked 6 years toward this opportunity. I'm not sure what you're implying, Dr. Sterling. I'm implying that young doctors who want successful careers don't associate themselves with nurses who violate hospital policies. Your future is bright, Emily. Don't let misplaced loyalty dim that brightness. The hospital staff began fragmenting under the pressure. Some nurses quietly supported Sarah, while others distanced themselves to protect their own jobs. The atmosphere turned toxic with suspicion and fear. Sarah returned to work Sunday night, but the hostility was palpable. Colleagues who'd been friendly for years now avoided eye contact. The break room fell silent when she entered. Janet Kruger had been busy poisoning the well, spreading suggestions that Sarah was a loose cannon who thought rules didn't apply to her. Nurse Betty Anderson, a 62-year-old veteran who'd worked with Sarah for 8 years, pulled her aside during a quiet moment. Honey, Kruger's got 3 people ready to testify that you violated protocol. She's building a case that'll destroy you. Blackwood wants to make an example. Show everyone what happens when staff challenge his authority. Betty, I saved that boy's life. I know, sweetie, we all know. But knowing what's right and proving it in court are different things. They've got lawyers, money, and power. What do you have? Sarah looked around the ER where she'd worked for 12 years, where she'd saved countless lives and comforted dying patients' families. What did she have? The truth, her conscience, and a community that was starting to pay attention. The breaking point came at shift change. Security guards appeared at Sarah's station with official paperwork. Ms. Martinez, you're suspended pending investigation, effective immediately, the head of security announced loud enough for everyone to hear. Please surrender your access badge and keys. The humiliation was intentional, a public spectacle designed to show other staff what happened to troublemakers. Sarah gathered her personal items while colleagues watched in uncomfortable silence. 12 years of dedicated service ended with a security escort to the parking garage. At home, Sarah had to tell Danny about the suspension. His reaction was explosive. This is bullshit. You saved someone's life, and they're treating you like a criminal. Danny language. No, Aunt Sarah, you're the best person I know, and they're destroying you for doing the right thing. This whole system is screwed up. Sarah looked at her nephew's angry face and saw her own father at that age, fighting injustice with passionate fury but no power to change anything. She'd raised Danny to believe that doing right mattered more than following rules. Now those values were destroying their lives. That night, Sarah lay awake calculating finances. Suspended without pay, facing potential legal costs, with a teenager depending on her. The hospital wanted her broken and desperate, ready to accept any plea deal that would make the problem disappear quietly. But in the ICU, Jimmy Torres was telling everyone who'd listen about the nurse who saved his life. And word was starting to spread beyond the hospital walls. Monday morning brought the story that would change everything. Jennifer Walsh, Channel 7 News' most tenacious investigative reporter, had gotten a tip from a hospital insider who couldn't stomach watching Sarah get railroaded. The morning news led with a banner headline that made Sarah's phone explode with calls. Local nurse faces criminal charges for saving Marine's life. Sarah watched the broadcast from her couch, Danny beside her, both staring at the television in disbelief. This is Sarah Martinez, Walsh reported, standing outside St. Mary's Hospital, a 12-year veteran nurse who may go to prison for saving the life of Corporal James Torres. Sources inside the hospital tell Channel 7 that Martinez used her own blood in a direct transfusion when the hospital had no compatible blood available. Now she faces felony charges that could result in 5 years in prison. The story went viral within hours. Save Nurse Sarah began trending on social media as people shared the basic facts. A nurse saved a Marine's life and was being prosecuted for it. The public reaction was immediate and furious. But Richard Blackwood doubled down. By noon, he'd called a hospital press conference, standing behind a podium bearing the St. Mary's logo while cameras rolled. Policies and regulations in healthcare exist to protect patients, Blackwood stated, his corporate suit and practice delivery making him look like a CEO defending a stock price. When staff members decide they're above established protocols, patients can die. This case isn't about one individual or one incident. It's about maintaining safety standards that protect everyone who enters this hospital. The performance was polished, but it rang hollow against Jennifer Walsh's follow-up reporting. She discovered that the blood shortage resulted from canceled blood drives, cost-cutting measures Blackwood had implemented to boost quarterly profit margins. Councilwoman Diane Reeves, a local politician who'd been fighting hospital budget cuts for 2 years, held her own press conference that afternoon. This hospital fired 200 nurses last year to increase profits, Reeves declared, standing on the courthouse steps with supporters behind her. Now they want to prosecute one of the nurses who stayed for actually caring about patients instead of profit margins. This is exactly backward. The battle lines were drawn and they split the community. Team Sarah included veterans groups, nursing unions, patients' rights advocates, and ordinary citizens who understood basic human decency. Team Hospital consisted of corporate administrators, their lawyers, insurance companies, and politicians who received hospital donations. The emotional turning point came when Jimmy Torres, released from the hospital but still recovering, appeared on Channel 7 News from his mother's modest home. Wearing his Marine dress uniform, medals visible, he looked directly into the camera. "That nurse saved my life. I was dying on that table, and Sarah Martinez gave her own blood to save me. She didn't know me, didn't know if I could pay, didn't know anything about me except that I was going to die without her help. Now they want to put her in prison for that? That's not the America I served 2 tours in Afghanistan to protect." Maria Torres sat beside her son, tears streaming down her face as she clutched a photo of Jimmy in his military graduation uniform. "Sarah Martinez saved my boy's life. She cry with me when she think Jimmy might die. This woman, she have the heart of an angel, and they want to destroy her for saving my son." The interview generated massive sympathy and sparked protests outside the hospital. Veterans in uniform joined nurses carrying signs reading, "Heroes don't belong in prison," and "Patience over profits." But the legal pressure intensified. District Attorney Margaret Foster, facing re-election in 6 months and needing to appear tough on healthcare fraud, announced that her office would prosecute aggressively. "Healthcare regulations exist for critical safety reasons," Foster declared at her own press conference. "We cannot have medical professionals deciding which rules to follow based on emotions or personal judgment. If we allow this precedent, we undermine the entire regulatory framework that protects patients." Sarah received a formal summons to appear in court. The charges were devastating: theft of medical supplies, felony carrying 3-5 years, practicing medicine without authorization, misdemeanor with potential license revocation, and falsifying medical records, felony carrying 2-4 years. Total potential sentence: 7 years in prison. She couldn't afford a competent lawyer. The public defender assigned to her case, Tom Bradley, was 26 years old, overworked, and had never handled a medical case. During their first meeting in his cramped office, he reviewed the charges with obvious discomfort. "Ms. Martinez, I have to be honest with you. The prosecution has a strong case. You did break hospital policy, you did take medical supplies without authorization, and you did perform procedures outside your documented scope of practice. Even though your intentions were good, the law is clear. So what are you saying?" "I'm saying you should consider pleading guilty to reduced charges. Maybe we can negotiate down to misdemeanors, avoid prison time. Fighting this could result in conviction on all felony counts." Sarah stared at this kid who was supposed to defend her and realized he'd already given up. She was facing corporate lawyers with unlimited resources, and her defense counsel was ready to surrender before the fight began. But then salvation arrived in an unexpected phone call. "Ms. Martinez, this is attorney Margaret Stone. I've been following your case, and I'd like to represent you." Margaret Stone was everything Tom Bradley wasn't: 45 years old, Harvard Law graduate, and a specialist in whistleblower cases and corporate malfeasance. She normally charged $500 an hour and had never lost a case against healthcare corporations. "I can't afford." "This isn't about money," Stone interrupted. "This is about a system that punishes people for doing the right thing while protecting administrators who let patients die for profit. I've built my career fighting these battles, Ms. Martinez, and I'd be honored to fight this one for you." Margaret Stone's involvement changed everything. Within 48 hours, she'd filed motions challenging the charges, demanding discovery of all hospital policies and financial records, and scheduling press conferences that reframed the narrative. "We're not just going to defend Sarah Martinez's actions," Stone announced to reporters. "We're going to put the entire healthcare system on trial. We'll prove that this hospital created the emergency that necessitated her heroic response, then tried to destroy her for exposing their deadly cost-cutting measures." Stone's investigation quickly uncovered damaging evidence: internal emails showing Blackwood knew about blood shortage problems, budget documents proving the canceled blood drives, and patient care metrics showing how staff cuts had affected outcomes. But Blackwood's legal team, led by corporate attorney James Hutchinson, fought back with their own media strategy. They released information about Sarah's financial struggles, suggesting she might have been motivated by potential insurance payouts. They dug up Danny's juvenile record, minor fights at school, to paint Sarah as an unfit guardian whose stress might affect her judgment. The media narrative became complex as both sides leaked information. Some outlets focused on the David versus Goliath angle of a nurse fighting a corporate hospital. Others questioned whether good intentions justified breaking medical protocols. But the core truth remained simple. A nurse had saved a Marine's life, and powerful people wanted to destroy her for it. In America, that story had power. The stage was set for a legal battle that would determine whether doing right still mattered more than following rules. 2 weeks before the trial, Sarah's world began crumbling in ways she'd never anticipated. The case had consumed every aspect of her life, burning through her modest savings, affecting Danny's behavior, and taking a devastating physical toll. She'd lost 15 pounds from stress and rarely slept more than 3 hours a night. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon when Officer Rodriguez brought Danny home in handcuffs. Sarah opened the door to see her nephew, face bruised and eyes defiant, standing beside a patient police officer who'd clearly seen this scene too many times. "Miss Martinez, your nephew was arrested for fighting at school. Third incident in 2 weeks," Officer Rodriguez explained, his tone sympathetic but firm. "The other students have been saying his aunt's going to prison, and Danny's been defending your honor with his fists." Sarah's heart shattered as she looked at Danny's swollen knuckles and the hurt in his eyes. This boy had already lost his parents to adult failures, and now her fight was destroying his childhood. "Danny, go to your room," she said quietly. "Aunt Sarah, I couldn't let them say those things about you. They were calling you a criminal, saying you deserve prison. I couldn't just— Room. Now." After Officer Rodriguez left with a warning, Sarah sat on her couch and finally broke down completely. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside, carrying months of suppressed fear and exhaustion. She'd tried to be strong for everyone, Danny, her patients, the community supporting her, but she was drowning. Danny emerged from his room 20 minutes later to find his aunt crying into her hands. "Aunt Sarah, I'm sorry. I know fighting makes things worse, but I couldn't let them trash you when you're a hero." "Danny, I'm not a hero. I'm just a nurse who made a decision that's destroying our lives." "No!" Danny exploded, his teenage emotions raw and powerful. "You saved someone's life. Everyone else is just evil. You did the right thing, and they're punishing you for it because the system is corrupt." That evening, Sarah received visitors who lifted her spirits despite everything. General Patricia Hayes arrived with a delegation that included Jimmy Torres, now walking without assistance, and several other Marines in dress uniforms. "Miss Martinez," General Hayes said formally, "the Marine Corps doesn't forget those who serve our own. We've been following this case closely, and we want you to know that you have our complete support." She presented Sarah with an official letter of commendation from Marine Corps headquarters for exceptional civilian service in preserving the life of a United States Marine. Jimmy Torres stepped forward, his young face serious with military bearing. "Ma'am, I've been wanting to thank you properly since that night. What you did? There aren't words for it. You gave me my life back." But even this honor couldn't dispel Sarah's growing desperation. The legal pressure had intensified beyond criminal charges. Margaret Stone discovered that Blackwood's team had found more ammunition for their character assassination campaign. "Sarah, they've uncovered your relationship with Dr. Marcus Webb 3 years ago," Stone explained during one of their strategy sessions. "It was completely innocent. You dated a physician who was later disciplined for prescription irregularities, but they're using it to paint you as someone with a pattern of associating with rule breakers. Marcus wrote 2 extra prescriptions for his elderly mother's pain medication. That was 3 years ago, and we broke up 6 months before his discipline hearing. I know, but they're building a narrative. They want the jury to see you as someone who consistently bends rules and associates with others who do the same." The prosecution had also added Dr. Patricia Wells, a nationally recognized blood banking expert, who would testify that direct transfusions outside of established protocols could be dangerous. "She's going to say that your actions, while well-intentioned, could have killed Corporal Torres if compatibility testing had been wrong," Stone warned. More devastating was the betrayal by Susan Kelly, a nurse who'd been present that night. Facing her own job pressures and family financial needs, Susan agreed to testify for the prosecution. "Susan claims you seemed reckless that night and didn't follow proper procedures," Stone reported. "She's going to say you appeared frantic and didn't consult with other staff before acting." Sarah felt sick. Susan Kelly had worked alongside her for 4 years. They'd saved lives together, comforted grieving families, and supported each other through difficult shifts. Now Susan was willing to destroy her to protect her own career. The hospital's dirty tricks escalated to targeting Danny directly. Jennifer Hayes, the school counselor, called Sarah for a meeting that felt more like an interrogation. Ms. Martinez, Danny's acting out behaviors are concerning. Fighting, defiance, declining grades. With your legal troubles and potential incarceration, we need to consider what's best for Danny's welfare. The implication was clear. They might seek to remove Danny from her custody, claiming her legal problems made her an unfit guardian. Sarah realized this wasn't coincidence when Margaret Stone discovered that the counselor's husband worked for Medicorp Holdings, the parent company that owned St. Mary's Hospital. They want you completely broken, Stone explained. They want you so desperate and afraid that you'll plead guilty and disappear quietly. Losing Danny would destroy you, and they know it. But the community support continued growing stronger in response to each escalation. Maria Torres organized the Latino community, leading prayer vigils and fundraising efforts. Veteran John McKenzie, who'd lost his leg in Iraq, started a GoFundMe page that raised $50,000 for Sarah's legal defense in just 1 week. The most powerful moment came when Jimmy Torres, against his mother's wishes, volunteered to testify on Sarah's behalf during the trial. "Mama, that woman saved my life. I was dying and she gave her own blood to save me. If I don't stand up for her now, what kind of man am I? What kind of Marine am I?" Maria Torres wept, but she understood. "You're right, mijo. We stand by those who stood by us." Local news coverage intensified when Jennifer Walsh produced a 5-part series called Blood and Bureaucracy, investigating how budget cuts at hospitals nationwide were endangering patients. The series revealed that Blackwood had implemented similar cost-saving measures at 3 other hospitals, with documented negative impacts on patient care at each facility. But Blackwood's team struck back with devastating effectiveness. They leaked information about Sarah's nursing license, having been briefly suspended 4 years earlier for a documentation error, a minor issue quickly resolved, but they presented it as evidence of a pattern of professional misconduct. The media narrative became muddied. Some began questioning whether Sarah was truly the hero she appeared to be, or whether there were legitimate concerns about her professional conduct. Sarah's confidence began wavering under the relentless attacks. During a late-night strategy session with Margaret Stone, she finally voiced her fears. "Maybe I should just plead guilty, accept a misdemeanor charge, avoid prison, try to keep my nursing license. I can't put Danny through this anymore. I can't watch them destroy his life because of my choices." Stone leaned across the table, her expression intense. "That's exactly what they want, Sarah. They've calculated that the pressure will break you. They're betting that you'll sacrifice yourself rather than fight back. Don't let them win." "But what if we lose? What if the jury convicts me and I go to prison? What happens to Danny then?" "Then we fight harder. Because the alternative, letting these bastards destroy healthcare workers for caring about patients, is worse than any personal cost." As the trial date approached, Sarah realized she was fighting not just for her own life, but for the soul of healthcare itself. The question wasn't whether she'd broken rules, but whether breaking unjust rules to save lives should be celebrated or criminalized. The answer would determine not just her fate, but the message sent to every healthcare worker in America. 1 week before the trial, Detroit had become a city divided. The case had evolved beyond a local legal dispute into a national symbol of healthcare priorities and individual conscience. Pro-Sarah rallies drew hundreds of supporters, while hospital administrators and law and order advocates organized counter-demonstrations arguing that rules existed for essential reasons. Mayor Richard Coleman found himself caught between opposing forces. St. Mary's Hospital was one of Detroit's largest employers and taxpayers, but public sentiment overwhelmingly favored Sarah. In a private meeting with Margaret Stone, Coleman revealed his personal feelings while explaining his political constraints. "Off the record, I think what she did was heroic," Coleman admitted in his office overlooking the Detroit River. "But I can't be seen as interfering with the justice system. I have to maintain neutrality, even though my heart is with your client." Stone pressed him. "Mr. Mayor, this case is about whether Detroit values profits over patients. Your silence is a position, and taking sides could destroy my ability to govern effectively. Sometimes leadership means staying above battles you'd prefer to fight." The most surprising ally emerged from an unexpected source. Dr. Jennifer Blackwood, Richard Blackwood's ex-wife and an emergency physician at Detroit Medical Center, contacted Stone secretly through intermediaries. "I need to speak with you about my ex-husband," Jennifer said during a clandestine meeting at a downtown cafe. "What he's doing to that nurse is exactly the kind of heartless bureaucracy that destroyed our marriage." Dr. Jennifer Blackwood had been married to Richard for 8 years before divorcing him 3 years earlier. She'd watched him transform from an ambitious but somewhat caring administrator into a ruthless cost-cutting machine who viewed patients as revenue streams. "Richard is a narcissist who cares more about spreadsheets than people," she explained to Stone. "I've seen what his policies do to patient care. I was there when he implemented the blood drive cancellations. He literally said emergency cases were profit negative and shouldn't be the hospital's priority." She provided Stone with inside information about Blackwood's management philosophy, his cost-cutting measures, and their documented impact on patient outcomes. More importantly, she had copies of confidential emails where Blackwood discussed prioritizing paying patients over emergency cases. But the most explosive revelation came from Mark Stevens, the blood bank technician whose conscience finally overcame his fear. Unable to live with the guilt of watching Sarah face destruction for saving Jimmy Torres, he approached Stone with information that changed everything. There was AB negative blood available that night, Mark revealed during a secret meeting at Stone's office. One unit that had been reserved for Senator Patricia Thornton's elective surgery scheduled for the following week. Stone nearly dropped her coffee. "Reserved blood for a politician's elective surgery while a Marine died?" Mark nodded, his hands shaking. Blackwood had issued a personal directive that no reserved blood should be used for emergency cases. He said VIP patients and scheduled procedures took priority over trauma cases because they were more profitable and politically important. This revelation was devastating. Sarah hadn't just broken policy to save Jimmy Torres. She'd saved him when compatible blood was available but being withheld for political and financial reasons. "Why didn't this come out during the initial investigation?" Stone demanded. "Because Blackwood threatened everyone involved. He said anyone who leaked information about VIP patient prioritization would be fired and blacklisted from healthcare jobs throughout Michigan." Mark's courage came with a price. Within 24 hours of his conversation with Stone, he was terminated from his position and threatened with legal action for violating confidentiality agreements. But his sacrifice provided the smoking gun that could destroy the prosecution's case. Meanwhile, investigative reporter David Chen, Jennifer Walsh's partner, uncovered a pattern of retaliation against hospital employees who supported Sarah. 6 workers had been fired, transferred to undesirable positions, or had their hours reduced since the investigation began. "This isn't about medical safety," Chen reported on Channel 7 News. "This is about a corporate machine systematically destroying anyone who threatens their narrative or exposes their policies." But the prosecution's case began cracking under scrutiny. Margaret Stone's investigation revealed that Dr. Patricia Wells, their star expert witness, had received $75,000 in consulting fees from Medicorp Holdings over the past 2 years. More damaging, Susan Kelly's promised promotion to charge nurse was contingent on her testimony against Sarah. Stone systematically exposed the corruption in pretrial motions and media appearances. This isn't about medical safety or proper procedures. This is about a corporate healthcare system that puts profits over patients and destroys anyone who challenges that priority. However, Blackwood's legal team escalated their personal attacks in response. Corporate attorney James Hutchinson orchestrated a media campaign designed to destroy Sarah's credibility and community support. They leaked information about Sarah's financial struggles, suggesting she might have been motivated by potential insurance payouts or lawsuit opportunities. They released Danny's school records, including his recent fights, to paint Sarah as an unstable guardian whose personal problems affected her professional judgment. The most vicious attack came from Janet Kruger, who gave an exclusive interview to a conservative talk radio host known for attacking what he called bleeding heart liberalism. "I've worked with Sarah Martinez for years," Kruger lied smoothly. "She's always believed rules didn't apply to her. She's constantly questioned authority, pushed boundaries, and made decisions based on emotions rather than proper protocols. This blood transfusion incident isn't an isolated heroic act. It represents a pattern of behavior that endangers patients." The interview was devastating because it came from a supposed colleague who'd worked closely with Sarah. Kruger painted Sarah as mentally unstable, professionally reckless, and fundamentally unsuited for nursing responsibilities. Sarah watched the interview at home with Danny, feeling each lie like a physical blow. Being betrayed by colleagues she'd trusted was more painful than facing the legal system. But community support grew stronger in response to each attack. Veterans for Sarah organized a march that drew 2,000 people, including active-duty military personnel and veterans from multiple wars. Jimmy Torres, still recovering but determined, gave a speech that was carried live on local television. That nurse didn't think about policies or procedures when I was dying on that table. She thought about saving a life, about my mother not having to bury her only son, about me being able to come home and marry my fiancé. That's what heroes do. They act when action is needed, not when it's convenient or bureaucratically approved. Maria Torres spoke after her son, her heavily accented English carrying emotional power that needed no translation. My son is alive because of Sarah Martinez. In my country, we lived under people who cared more about rules than lives. We know what real evil looks like. This, attacking someone who saves lives, this is evil. The political pressure intensified when Congresswoman Linda Martinez, no relation to Sarah, called for federal investigation into hospital policies that endangered patients. When healthcare workers are prosecuted for saving lives, something is fundamentally wrong with our healthcare system, she declared on the House floor. The federal government must investigate whether hospitals are implementing policies that prioritize profits over patients. General Patricia Hayes made an unprecedented move by publicly stating that the Marine Corps was prepared to provide character witnesses for Sarah's trial. The military doesn't typically involve itself in civilian legal matters, she told reporters. But we don't abandon those who serve our Marines either. Sarah Martinez exemplifies the courage and compassion we hope to find in everyone who cares for our service members. The night before jury selection began, Sarah received an anonymous phone call at home. The voice was electronically disguised, but the message was clear. Drop the case and plead guilty, or your nephew gets hurt. Margaret Stone immediately contacted the FBI. The threat was traced to a cell phone purchased with a credit card linked to the hospital's private security contractor. They're not just trying to destroy you professionally, Stone realized. They're willing to threaten a child to cover up their malfeasance. This revelation galvanized even Sarah's critics. Councilwoman Diane Reeves called an emergency city council meeting that drew national media attention. When corporations threaten children to cover up their deadly policies, we've crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, Reeves declared. This city council unanimously calls for federal investigation into St. Mary's Hospital and demands protection for Sarah Martinez and her family. But Blackwood deployed his final weapon. He hired James Morrison, District Attorney Foster's election opponent, to represent the hospital in a parallel civil lawsuit seeking $500,000 in damages from Sarah. Even if she wins the criminal case, she'll face financial ruin from civil litigation, Morrison announced at a press conference. This hospital will pursue every legal remedy to recover damages from her reckless actions. The message was unmistakable. Even victory would be Pyrrhic. Sarah could beat the criminal charges and still lose everything to civil litigation. As jury selection began, Sarah realized she wasn't just fighting for her freedom, she was fighting for the principle that saving lives should never be a criminal act and that corporations shouldn't be allowed to destroy individual citizens who challenge their power. The battle lines were drawn, and the entire country was watching. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with protesters lining the sidewalks around Wayne County Courthouse. Sarah walked through a gauntlet of supporters carrying signs reading, "Heroes don't belong in prison," and "Patience over profits," while smaller groups of counter-protesters held placards declaring, "Rules matter and medical safety first." Inside the imposing courthouse, Judge Martha Wellington called the courtroom to order. At 58, Wellington had 20 years of judicial experience and a reputation for fairness tempered by strict adherence to legal procedure. The jury consisted of 8 women and 4 men, a retired factory worker, a young tech professional, a nurse from another hospital, an insurance adjuster, a teacher, a veteran, a small business owner, a college student, a social worker, a construction foreman, a librarian, and a restaurant manager. District Attorney Margaret Foster rose to deliver her opening statement. Impeccably dressed and commanding in her presentation, she'd built her career on tough prosecutions of healthcare fraud and white-collar crime. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about heroism, emotion, or good intentions. It's about a healthcare system that depends on strict rules and regulations to keep patients safe. When individual healthcare workers decide they know better than established medical protocols, patients can die. Foster walked slowly before the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. The defendant, Sarah Martinez, wants you to focus on the drama of saving Corporal Torres's life. But laws aren't suspended because we feel good about someone's intentions or approve of their results. She outlined the charges methodically. Ms. Martinez took medical supplies without proper authorization. That's theft, regardless of her motives. She performed medical procedures outside her documented scope of practice. That's practicing medicine without proper licensing. She failed to document her actions according to established protocols. That's falsification of medical records. Foster's opening was polished and logical, appealing to the jury's respect for law and order. If we excuse rule-breaking because we approve of the outcomes, we undermine the legal and medical systems that protect all of us. Today, it's blood transfusions performed without proper safeguards. Tomorrow, it could be unauthorized surgeries, experimental drugs, or procedures that kill rather than save. Margaret Stone's opening statement took a dramatically different approach. Rather than defending Sarah's rule-breaking, she attacked the system that made rule-breaking necessary. Ms. Foster is absolutely right about one thing. This case is about life and death, but she's wrong about who was willing to let Corporal Torres die that night. Stone promised to prove that hospital policies prioritized profits over patients, that Sarah's actions were within her training and scope of practice, and that the prosecution represented a corporate cover-up of deadly cost-cutting measures. We'll show you that this hospital had compatible blood available but reserved it for a politician's elective surgery rather than a dying Marine. We'll prove that the dangerous procedures Ms. Martinez performed are standard emergency nursing protocols. And we'll demonstrate that this prosecution is designed to silence anyone who challenges a healthcare system that values money more than human life. The prosecution's first witness was Richard Blackwood himself. Dressed in an expensive Navy suit with perfect corporate styling, he explained hospital hierarchy and the importance of established policies. Nurses operate under strict protocols for patient safety, Blackwood testified in his polished boardroom voice. Direct blood transfusions without physician authorization and proper compatibility testing can cause hemolytic reactions, infections, even death. These policies exist because improper transfusions have killed patients. Foster led him through a detailed explanation of hospital procedures, blood banking protocols, and the chain of command that Sarah had allegedly violated. Mr. Blackwood, what are the potential consequences when nurses perform unauthorized medical procedures? Patient death, liability exposure for the hospital, and violation of federal regulations that could result in loss of Medicare funding and Joint Commission accreditation. Margaret Stone's cross-examination revealed Blackwood's true priorities. She forced him to acknowledge his corporate background, lack of medical training, and responsibility for cost-cutting measures that had reduced nursing staff by 30%. Mr. Blackwood, you fired 200 nurses but kept your $300,000 salary, correct? Personnel decisions are based on operational efficiency requirements. Were you aware that blood drive cancellations contributed to the shortage that endangered Corporal Torres? Blood inventory management involves complex logistical considerations. Stone pressed harder, her voice sharpening. Simple question, Mr. Blackwood. If you were dying and needed blood, would you want the nurse to follow your policies or save your life? Foster objected, but the question resonated with the jury. Several jurors looked uncomfortable with Blackwood's corporate coldness. Dr. Patricia Wells, the prosecution's medical expert, provided polished testimony about transfusion risks. An internationally recognized authority on blood banking, she explained how improper procedures could cause fatal reactions. Direct transfusions between individuals, even those with compatible blood types, can cause immediate hemolytic shock and death if proper cross-matching and screening aren't performed, she testified authoritatively. But Stone's cross-examination exposed Wells's financial relationship with Medicorp Holdings, the hospital's parent corporation. Dr. Wells, how much money have you received from Medicorp Holdings over the past 2 years? My consulting work is completely separate from this testimony. $75,000 in consulting fees from the same corporation that's prosecuting Ms. Martinez to testify that her life-saving actions were dangerous. Isn't that a conflict of interest? Wells's credibility suffered visible damage as Stone revealed the extent of her financial ties to the hospital system. The prosecution's most damaging witness was Susan Kelly, the nurse who'd been present that night. Clearly uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact with Sarah, she testified that Sarah had seemed frantic and didn't follow normal procedures. Did she consult with you before starting the transfusion? Foster asked. No, she just started doing it. She seemed panicked, not thinking clearly. Did this concern you from a patient safety perspective? Yes. We have protocols for emergency situations. She ignored all of them. But Stone's cross-examination revealed Kelly's promised promotion and fear for her job security. Ms. Kelly, were you promised a promotion to charge nurse in exchange for your testimony? Kelly's face reddened. That promotion is based on merit, Merit determined by hospital administrators who are prosecuting Ms. Martinez? You're testifying against a colleague who saved a life, and you're being rewarded with career advancement? Stone's questioning exposed Kelly's moral compromise, turning her testimony into evidence of hospital intimidation rather than professional concern. Janet Kruger provided the most vicious character assassination, painting Sarah as a chronic rule-breaker who'd always believed policies didn't apply to her. Sarah Martinez has consistently pushed boundaries throughout her employment, Kruger testified with barely concealed satisfaction. She's questioned authority, challenged established procedures, and prioritized her personal judgment over institutional protocols. Kruger cited minor incidents from years past: documentation delays, questions about procedures, informal consultations with physicians, building a picture of someone who habitually disrespected authority. Foster used Kruger's testimony to argue that Sarah's actions represented a pattern of behavior rather than an isolated emergency decision. But Stone's cross-examination revealed Kruger's jealousy and personal animosity. Ms. Kruger, you applied for Ms. Martinez's position as senior charge nurse twice and were rejected both times, correct? Personnel decisions are based on qualifications. Qualifications that apparently favored Ms. Martinez over you? Now you're testifying that she's unfit for the job you wanted but couldn't obtain? Stone exposed Kruger's testimony as motivated by personal resentment rather than professional concern. The prosecution's final witness was Detective Mike Harrison, who explained the investigation that led to criminal charges. Professional and thorough, he detailed the evidence of policy violations and regulatory breaches. Based on hospital records and staff interviews, Mrs. Martinez clearly violated established blood banking procedures, performed unauthorized medical interventions, and failed to document her actions properly. But Stone got Harrison to acknowledge the unique nature of the case. Detective, in 20 years of police work, have you ever investigated someone for saving a life? Harrison paused uncomfortably. This case involves regulatory violations and potential patient endangerment, not life-saving heroics. But without Ms. Martinez's actions, Corporal Torres would have died that night? That's what the medical evidence suggests, yes. Foster's closing argument for the prosecution emphasized themes of law and order, professional standards, and the dangers of vigilante medicine. Ladies and gentlemen, sympathy cannot override law. Good intentions don't justify illegal actions. If we excuse rule-breaking because we approve of the results, we undermine the legal system that protects all of us. She hammered the technical violations. The defendant took medical supplies without authorization. Theft. She performed procedures outside her scope of practice. Unauthorized medical practice. She failed to document properly. Falsification of records. These are facts, not opinions. Foster concluded with an appeal to legal consistency. Convict Sarah Martinez not because you want to punish her personally, but because the rule of law demands equal application regardless of emotional circumstances. The prosecution had established that Sarah broke policies and violated regulations. But they'd also revealed a healthcare system more concerned with corporate liability than patient welfare. As court adjourned, Sarah faced the reality that technical guilt was clear. She had violated policies. The question was whether the jury would care more about legal technicalities or human life. Wednesday morning marked the beginning of Sarah's defense, and Margaret Stone opened with a bombshell that transformed the entire trial. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to prove that Sarah Martinez didn't break policy to save Corporal Torres. She broke policy that was designed to let him die. Her first witness was Mark Stevens, the blood bank technician whose career had been destroyed for telling the truth. Walking to the witness stand with visible nervousness, Mark knew his testimony would expose the hospital's most closely guarded secret. Mr. Stevens, was there AB negative blood available in the hospital on the night Corporal Torres was dying? Stone asked directly. Mark's voice shook as he answered. Yes. There was 1 unit of AB negative blood in our inventory. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Judge Wellington called for order, while jurors stared at Mark in disbelief. Stone continued. If compatible blood was available, why wasn't it used for Corporal Torres? Because it was reserved for Senator Patricia Thornton's elective gallbladder surgery, scheduled for the following week. Mr. Blackwood had issued a written directive that no reserved blood should be used for emergency cases. Can you explain this directive? Mark pulled out a crumpled paper, a copy of Blackwood's memo he'd hidden from investigators. It stated that VIP patients and scheduled procedures took priority over trauma cases because they generated more reliable revenue and maintained important political relationships. Foster objected repeatedly. but Stone had the documentation. The jury saw evidence of Blackwood's directive prioritizing paying customers over dying patients. So, Corporal Torres was dying while compatible blood sat unused in your refrigerator? Yes. Mr. Blackwood's exact words were that emergency cases were profit negative, and the hospital shouldn't waste resources on people who might not be able to pay their bills. Stone let that sink in before asking, "What happened when you tried to use the reserved blood for Corporal Torres?" I was told absolutely not. Even when I explained that a Marine was dying, I was told that Senator Thornton's surgery couldn't be delayed for a random trauma case. The jury looked horrified. This wasn't about medical safety or proper procedures. This was about institutional indifference to human life while protecting wealthy and politically connected patients. Stone's next witness was Dr. Jennifer Blackwood, whose insider knowledge devastated her ex-husband's credibility. Dr. Blackwood, you were married to Richard Blackwood for 8 years. Can you describe his management philosophy? Jennifer Blackwood was composed and professional, her medical credentials lending authority to her testimony. Richard implemented policies that prioritized financial metrics over patient outcomes. He regularly said that emergency cases were money losers and the hospital should focus on profitable scheduled procedures. Did he express awareness that these policies endangered patients? Multiple times. When I raised concerns about staff cuts and supply shortages, he said emergency room deaths were cost of doing business and that paying malpractice settlements was cheaper than maintaining adequate staffing. Stone presented internal emails Jennifer had saved, showing Blackwood's callous calculations about patient deaths versus operational costs. Dr. Blackwood, why did your marriage end? Jennifer's voice carried quiet pain. I couldn't live with a man who viewed patients as profit centers rather than human beings. When he started talking about emergency room patients as profit-negative consumers, I realized I'd married someone without basic human compassion. The prosecution's medical expert was countered by Dr. James Martinez, former chief of emergency medicine at Johns Hopkins, and author of standard trauma care protocols used nationwide. Dr. Martinez, were Miss Martinez's actions appropriate given the emergency circumstances? Stone asked. Absolutely. Direct transfusion between compatible donors is a recognized emergency procedure when processed blood is unavailable. Miss Martinez acted according to standard emergency protocols taught in every nursing program in the country. He explained that Sarah's nursing training included emergency transfusion procedures and that her actions fell well within her scope of practice during life-threatening emergencies. Doctor, was Miss Martinez qualified to perform this procedure? Completely qualified. Emergency nurses receive extensive training for exactly these situations. I've supervised hundreds of nurses performing similar interventions during my 30-year career. Foster's cross-examination challenged this, but Dr. Martinez was unshakable. Miss Martinez saved that young man's life using proper emergency procedures. Any competent emergency physician would have made the same decision. Dr. Emily Chen testified next, clearly nervous, but determined to tell the truth about that night's desperate circumstances. Dr. Chen, can you describe the situation when Corporal Torres arrived? He was dying. Massive blood loss, blood pressure dropping rapidly, going into shock. Without immediate transfusion, he would have died within minutes. What options were available? Chen looked directly at the jury. None that would have saved his life. Other hospitals were out of compatible blood, transport would have taken too long, and he was too unstable for transfer anyway. What would have happened without Miss Martinez's intervention? Corporal Torres would have died. There's no question about that. Foster's cross-examination tried to establish that proper procedures should have been followed regardless of outcome, but Chen stood firm. Sometimes patient care requires difficult decisions. Sarah Martinez made the right choice. The courtroom's emotional center shifted when Corporal Jimmy Torres took the stand. Still recovering, he walked slowly but proudly in his Marine dress uniform, decorations visible on his chest. Corporal Torres, can you describe what you remember from that night? Stone asked gently. Jimmy's young voice carried the weight of someone who'd faced death and survived. I remember feeling my life slipping away. The pain was incredible, but worse was knowing I was dying. Then this nurse, Ms. Martinez, she didn't hesitate. She rolled up her sleeve and saved my life. His voice strengthened as he continued. I've served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've seen heroes and cowards, people who act when action is needed and people who hide behind rules when lives are at stake. Sarah Martinez is a hero. Stone asked, what would have happened without her actions? Jimmy looked directly at his mother in the gallery. I'd be dead. My mother would have buried her only son. My fiancé would be planning a funeral instead of a wedding. All those dreams, all that future, it would be gone. Foster's cross-examination was necessarily brutal, but it backfired. Corporal Torres, you were unconscious for part of this incident. How do you know what procedures were or weren't followed? Jimmy's response was devastating. Ma'am, with all due respect, I know that when I needed help, one person stood up while your hospital's policies said let me die. Rules didn't save me. Sarah Martinez did. Maria Torres followed her son, testifying in heavily accented English that carried emotional power beyond language barriers. She cry with me when she think my Jimmy might die. Maria sobbed. This woman, she have the heart of an angel. She save my boy when the hospital say no, when their rules say let him die. Stone called character witnesses who painted Sarah as dedicated, compassionate, and skilled. Father Miguel Santos testified about her volunteer work with homeless patients. Veteran John McKenzie described her care during his own medical crisis. But the most powerful character witness was General Patricia Hayes, testifying in full military uniform about the Marine Corps' perspective on Sarah's actions. General Hayes, how does the military view Miss Martinez's actions? Stone asked. The Marine Corps values courage, honor, and commitment to preserving life. Miss Martinez demonstrated all these qualities when she chose to save Corporal Torres, rather than follow policies that would have let him die. Is this the kind of person you want caring for military personnel? Miss Martinez is exactly the kind of civilian we hope to find in hospitals where our Marines receive care, someone who puts saving lives above bureaucratic convenience. Foster objected to military testimony in a civilian case, but Judge Wellington allowed it as character evidence. Stone's final witness was Sarah herself. Against conventional legal wisdom, she took the stand to tell her own story directly to the jury. Ms. Martinez, why did you become a nurse? Stone asked. Sarah's voice was steady and clear. To save lives. To be there for people in their darkest moments. To make sure that when someone needs help, they get it. That night, when you saw Corporal Torres dying, what went through your mind? I thought about his mother, about the young man he was, about all the life ahead of him. I thought about my training, my oath as a nurse, my responsibility to patients. I couldn't let him die when I had the power to save him. Stone walked her through the decision-making process, the technical aspects of the transfusion, and the aftermath. Ms. Martinez, knowing what you know now about the consequences, would you make the same decision again? Sarah looked directly at Jimmy Torres in the gallery, then at the jury. Absolutely. Because I've learned that sometimes doing right means standing up to people who prioritize money over lives. That night, I chose to put Jimmy Torres' life first, and I will never regret that choice. Foster's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to establish that Sarah had been reckless and had alternatives available. Ms. Martinez, you knew you were breaking hospital policy? Yes. You knew this could endanger your career? Yes. Yet you did it anyway, without consulting superiors or following established procedures? Sarah's answer resonated through the courtroom. Corporal Torres was dying. There was no time for committees or consultations. There was only time to save his life or watch him die. I chose to save him. Stone's closing argument tied everything together in a passionate summation that reframed the entire case. This case isn't about Sarah Martinez breaking rules. It's about a healthcare system so corrupted by profit motives that saving lives becomes a criminal act. They want you to convict a woman for embarrassing a corporation, for exposing policies that prioritize money over patients. She systematically dismantled the prosecution's case. Theft? Sarah used her own blood. Medical practice? She performed procedures within her training. Falsification? The only thing falsified is their characterization of heroism as criminality. Stone pointed to Jimmy Torres. That young Marine is alive because Sarah Martinez chose compassion over compliance, patience over policies, doing right over staying safe. If you convict her, you're saying his life didn't matter, that corporate profits matter more than human compassion. Her closing was emotional and powerful. Sarah Martinez is guilty of one thing, caring more about saving lives than protecting her career. In any just society, that's not a crime. It's heroism. The defense had transformed the trial from a case about rule-breaking into a referendum on healthcare priorities and human decency. Thursday morning brought the trial's climactic moment as both sides prepared their final arguments. The courthouse overflowed with spectators, national media representatives, and protesters whose vigil had continued throughout the proceedings. District Attorney Foster rose for her closing argument, acknowledging the emotional weight of the case while insisting on legal principles above all. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I want to be clear about something from the start. Everyone in this courtroom admires Sarah Martinez's intentions. We all wish we lived in a world where good motives automatically justified any actions taken. But our legal system cannot function on good intentions alone. Foster walked deliberately before the jury, her voice carrying the authority of law and precedent. The defense has tried to make this trial about healthcare, politics, and corporate greed. They've presented emotional testimony designed to make you forget that laws apply equally to everyone, regardless of the nobility of their motives. She returned to the fundamental charges with methodical precision. The defendant took medical supplies without proper authorization. That constitutes theft under Michigan law, regardless of how those supplies were used. She performed medical procedures outside the established scope of nursing practice. That's practicing medicine without proper licensing. She failed to document her actions according to legally required protocols. That's falsification of medical records. Foster addressed the defense's emotional appeals directly. Ms. Stone wants you to focus on Corporal Torres's life, and we should all be grateful he survived. But what about the next patient who might die because a nurse decides hospital policies don't apply to them? What about the patient who suffers a severe reaction because proper compatibility testing wasn't performed? What about the systematic breakdown that occurs when individual healthcare workers substitute their judgment for established medical protocols? Her argument grew stronger as she challenged the jury's sympathies. The defense presented evidence about hospital policies and budget cuts. Even if every criticism of hospital management is true, that doesn't give individual employees the right to ignore laws and regulations. If nurses can decide which policies to follow based on their personal assessment of situations, we no longer have a healthcare system, we have medical chaos. Foster saved her most powerful argument for the conclusion. If we excuse law-breaking because we approve of the results, we undermine the rule of law itself. Today you're asked to excuse unauthorized medical procedures because they saved a life. Tomorrow, will you excuse unauthorized surgeries because the surgeon believed they were necessary? Will you excuse experimental drug treatments because the nurse thought they might help? Where does it end? She concluded with a direct challenge to the jury. Convict Sarah Martinez not because you want to punish her personally, but because the law demands equal application. Justice requires that good intentions don't override legal obligations. The rule of law depends on your verdict. Margaret Stone's closing argument took a fundamentally different approach, directly challenging the prosecution's framework and demanding that the jury consider context, morality, and systemic justice. Ms. Foster wants you to believe this case is about following rules versus breaking them. It's not. This case is about a healthcare system so morally bankrupt that saving lives becomes a criminal act, and the corporations that profit from that system want to destroy anyone who exposes their deadly priorities. Stone moved with passionate energy, her voice carrying moral outrage that had built throughout the trial. Let's talk about rules, Ms. Foster. What about the rule that hospitals should prioritize patient care? What about the rule that healthcare providers should do no harm? What about the rule that human life has value regardless of someone's ability to pay? She systematically addressed each charge with devastating effectiveness. Theft? Sarah Martinez used her own blood to save a life. The only thing stolen here was Corporal Torres's chance to live, stolen by policies that reserved blood for wealthy politicians, while Marines died. Medical practice? She performed procedures within her nursing training and scope of practice, procedures that are standard emergency interventions taught in every nursing program in America. Falsification? The only thing being falsified is this prosecution's characterization of heroism as criminality. Stone brought out the exhibits showing Blackwood's policies and their deadly consequences. This isn't about one nurse breaking one rule on one night. This is about a corporate healthcare system that institutionalizes cruelty, that literally budgets for patient deaths because paying settlements is cheaper than providing adequate care. Her voice rose with controlled anger. They had compatible blood that night. They chose to let Corporal Torres die rather than inconvenience a politician's elective surgery. Sarah Martinez broke their rules to save a life they were willing to sacrifice for profit and political connections. Stone addressed the prosecution's slippery slope argument directly. Ms. Foster asks where it ends if we excuse rule-breaking. I ask where it ends if we criminalize compassion. If we convict Sarah Martinez, what message does that send to every healthcare worker in America? That following orders matters more than saving lives? That corporate policies matter more than human compassion? That protecting your career is more important than protecting your patients? She pointed to Jimmy Torres in the gallery. The prosecution wants you to focus on abstract legal principles while ignoring the concrete reality that this young Marine is alive because one nurse had the courage to put patients before policies. They want you to send Sarah Martinez to prison for saving the life they were willing to sacrifice. Stone's most powerful moment came when she directly challenged the jury's role in the broader healthcare crisis. You're not just deciding Sarah Martinez's fate today. You're deciding what kind of healthcare system you want for yourselves, your families, your community. Do you want a system where healthcare workers are afraid to save lives because they might face prosecution? Do you want hospitals where profit margins matter more than patient outcomes? She concluded with a moral imperative that resonated through the packed courtroom. Sarah Martinez broke rules to save a life. If that's a crime, then we live in a society where heroism is illegal and compassion is criminalized. I trust you to be braver than that. I trust you to send a message that in America, saving lives still matters more than protecting corporate interests. Judge Wellington provided jury instructions that emphasized their obligation to base decisions on law rather than emotion, while also explaining concepts of necessity and justification that could support acquittal. The jury retired for deliberation at 2:30 p.m., carrying the weight of a decision that would resonate far beyond Sarah Martinez's personal fate. Inside the jury room, the deliberation was intense and emotional. Tom Hendricks, the retired factory worker serving as Juror 3, argued passionately for acquittal. She saved that boy's life. How in God's name is that wrong? I don't care what their policies say. Some things are just right or wrong, and saving lives is right. Patricia Winters, the insurance adjuster serving as Juror 7, represented the prosecution's position. I feel terrible about it, but she did break laws. We can't just ignore that because we like the outcome. If everyone decides which laws to follow, we don't have a legal system. Linda Johnson, the nurse serving as Juror 5, provided crucial professional perspective. I've been in Sarah's situation. Not exactly the same, but similar. Sometimes you have to choose between following policies and saving patients. Every good nurse has faced that choice. She chose correctly. The deliberation continued for 6 hours, with jurors working through each charge separately while grappling with the broader implications of their decision. Robert Chen, the retired teacher serving as foreman, guided the discussion through systematic analysis of the evidence while acknowledging the emotional weight of their choice. The breakthrough came when Jennifer Torres, the young mother serving as Juror 9, spoke about her own perspective. I keep thinking about my children. If one of them was dying and needed help, I'd want someone like Sarah Martinez there. Someone who cares more about saving lives than covering their ass with paperwork. As evening approached, the jury reached unanimous decisions on all charges. At 8:30 p.m., they returned to the packed courtroom where Sarah sat holding Danny's hand while Margaret Stone prepared for the verdict that would determine her client's fate. The jury foreman stood with deliberate formality as Judge Wellington called for the verdicts that would determine Sarah's fate and send a message about healthcare priorities throughout America. On the charge of theft of medical supplies, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah began crying while Danny pumped his fist in triumph. Veterans in the gallery saluted, and Maria Torres wept tears of joy. On the charge of practicing medicine without proper authorization, we find the defendant not guilty. The celebration grew louder as supporters realized their hero would not face prison for saving a life. On the charge of falsification of medical records, we find the defendant not guilty. The courthouse shook with applause as Jimmy Torres rushed forward to embrace Sarah, followed by his mother, General Hayes, and dozens of supporters who'd stood by her throughout the ordeal. Order! Order in the courtroom, Judge Wellington called, but even she seemed moved by the emotional outpouring. Outside, the crowd of 2,000 erupted in celebration with chants of "Justice for Sarah" and "Heroes aren't criminals." The acquittal became a symbol of human decency triumphing over corporate callousness. Juror Robert Chen later told reporters, "We couldn't convict someone for saving a life. The law has to have room for human compassion, especially when the alternative was letting a young Marine die." Margaret Stone addressed the media with tears in her eyes. This verdict affirms that doing right sometimes means standing up to systems that prioritize profits over people. Sarah Martinez is a hero, and today justice recognized that fundamental truth. Sarah herself was overwhelmed by the support and vindication. "I just want to thank everyone who stood by me, who believed that saving lives matters more than following rules that protect corporations instead of patients." But even as supporters celebrated, Richard Blackwood's response revealed that the victory was incomplete. This verdict sends a dangerous message that healthcare workers can ignore established procedures based on personal judgment. We'll pursue all available remedies to protect patient safety and institutional integrity. District Attorney Foster graciously accepted the verdict while maintaining her position. While I disagree with the outcome, I respect the jury's decision. This case raised important questions about healthcare regulation and individual responsibility that deserve continued discussion. Within a week, Sarah learned that criminal acquittal was only the beginning of her battles. Blackwood announced the hospital's civil lawsuit seeking $500,000 in damages for violations of protocol that endangered patient safety and damaged the institution's reputation. Corporate attorney James Hutchinson explained their strategy. Criminal courts require proof beyond reasonable doubt, but civil liability operates under different standards. We intend to prove that her actions, while well-intentioned, caused significant harm to hospital operations and public trust. More devastating was the complaint filed with the Michigan Board of Nursing, seeking suspension or revocation of Sarah's professional license. Board investigator Carol Stevens explained that criminal acquittal provided no protection against professional sanctions. Professional standards differ from criminal standards. A nurse can be found not guilty of crimes but still face professional consequences for conduct that falls below established practice standards. Sarah realized she could win every legal battle and still lose her career, the only work she'd ever wanted and the foundation of Danny's stability. The hospital implemented immediate retaliation against anyone who'd supported Sarah. Betty Anderson was transferred to the night shift in a less desirable unit. Dr. W. Emily Chen discovered her fellowship recommendation was under review. Mark Stevens found himself blacklisted from other hospital positions despite his courageous testimony. Margaret Stone filed whistleblower protection complaints, but the damage to careers was immediate while legal remedies could take years. Danny struggled with the aftermath's complexities. The criminal trial's end hadn't resolved their problems. If anything, the continued legal battles felt more overwhelming than the original charges. Aunt Sarah, I thought winning meant it was over. Why are they still trying to destroy you? Because powerful people don't like being exposed, mijo. They want to make sure nobody else stands up to them. So we keep fighting forever? Sarah looked at her nephew's tired face and wondered if the cost of her principles was destroying his childhood. I don't know, baby. I honestly don't know. The community support remained strong, but Sarah faced impossible choices about her future. General Hayes renewed her offer of a civilian nursing position at Great Lakes Naval Station, providing federal protection and a chance to serve military families. The offer stands, Ms. Martinez. Federal employment would protect you from state licensing issues and civil litigation. You'd be serving the military community that supported you throughout this ordeal. But accepting would mean leaving Detroit, abandoning colleagues, still facing retaliation, and admitting defeat to Blackwood's campaign of destruction. The decision became more complicated when unexpected support emerged from Jimmy Torres' announcement that he was leaving the Marines to pursue nursing, inspired by Sarah's example. Sarah Martinez showed me what real courage looks like, he told reporters. I want to be like her, someone who puts saving lives ahead of everything else, someone who stands up to systems that prioritize money over people. His decision generated positive media coverage, while highlighting the personal costs of Sarah's stand. A young Marine was leaving military service because civilian institutions had failed to protect someone who'd saved his life. Father Miguel Santos organized another community meeting at St. Catherine's Church, where 300 people gathered to discuss ongoing support for Sarah and broader healthcare reform. This case exposed problems that go far beyond one hospital, Santos told the assembly. We need systemic change, not just justice for one hero. Councilwoman Diane Reeves announced the city investigation had uncovered a pattern of dangerous cost-cutting measures at St. Torty. Mary's Hospital, blood drive cancellations that created critical shortages, staffing cuts that increased patient mortality rates, equipment maintenance deferrals that led to breakdowns during emergencies, and policies prioritizing paying patients over emergency cases. The evidence shows that hospital administrators implemented policies they knew would endanger patients, Reeves reported. This wasn't incompetence. It was calculated indifference to human life. But Mayor Coleman, facing pressure from hospital donors, limited the investigation's scope and refused to support federal intervention. As winter approached, Sarah faced the reality that her legal victory had come with continuing costs that might ultimately destroy her anyway. The civil lawsuit threatened financial ruin, the licensing investigation jeopardized her career, and the ongoing retaliation created a hostile environment that made returning to hospital work nearly impossible. Margaret Stone continued preparing for the civil trial while helping Sarah navigate professional licensing challenges, but the battles could continue for years with no guarantee of victory. They want you to give up, Stone explained during one of their strategy sessions. They're betting that you'll get tired of fighting, run out of money, or just disappear quietly rather than continue challenging their system. Sarah looked at photos of Jimmy Torres's recovery, letters from veterans thanking her, and children's drawings from Danny's classmates calling her a hero. The support was real and powerful, but so was the institutional determination to destroy her. The question remained: could individual courage and community support overcome corporate power and systemic corruption? The answer would determine not just Sarah Martinez's fate, but whether ordinary people could still challenge powerful institutions and win. 6 months after the criminal trial, Sarah's case had evolved into a national symbol of healthcare worker advocacy and corporate accountability. The civil trial approached while the nursing board investigation continued, but unexpected developments would shift the entire landscape in ways no one anticipated. Jennifer Walsh's investigative reporting reached a crescendo when she obtained internal hospital documents through a courageous whistleblower. Dr. Emily Chen, deciding her career mattered less than patient safety, had secretly copied files that revealed the full extent of Blackwood's deadly policies. The leaked documents showed that Blackwood's cost-cutting measures had directly contributed to 17 preventable patient deaths over 2 years. The evidence included blood shortages that delayed critical surgeries for emergency patients, staffing cuts that led to medication errors and missed diagnoses, equipment failures that weren't promptly repaired, causing treatment delays, explicit policies prioritizing profitable procedures over emergency care. Most damaging was an email from Blackwood to the hospital's board of directors. Emergency cases are profit-negative investments. We must discourage non-paying customers from viewing this facility as their primary care option. Acceptable mortality rates should be calculated against revenue optimization. The revelation triggered federal investigation by the Department of Health and Human Services and the FBI's White-Collar Crime Unit. Special Agent Patricia Morrison led the investigation into potential Medicare fraud and patient endangerment. When healthcare administrators implement policies that prioritize profits over patient safety to the point where people die, that's not just unethical. It's potentially criminal under federal healthcare fraud statutes, Agent Morrison announced. The political landscape shifted dramatically. Congresswoman Linda Martinez introduced the Sarah Martinez Healthcare Worker Protection Act, providing federal protections for healthcare workers who violated policies to save lives. If we don't protect healthcare workers who prioritize patients over bureaucracy, we'll create a system where people die for administrative convenience rather than medical necessity, she argued during congressional hearings that drew national attention. Senator Patricia Thornton faced her own scandal when her connection to the reserved blood became public knowledge. The revelation that a Marine nearly died while blood was saved for her elective surgery generated massive criticism and calls for investigation into political favoritism in healthcare. The civil trial became a public relations disaster for the hospital, as Stone's discovery process revealed the full scope of Blackwood's policies and their human consequences. Dr. Jennifer Blackwood testified about her ex-husband's ruthless management philosophy. Richard calculated that paying malpractice settlements was cheaper than maintaining proper staffing and equipment. He literally budgeted for preventable deaths as a cost of doing business. The trial's most powerful testimony came from families of patients who had died due to hospital policies. Robert Johnson, whose wife had died during a blood shortage, addressed the court with quiet fury. "My wife died because this hospital had policies that prevented staff from saving her life. Sarah Martinez broke those same policies to save Corporal Torres. If more healthcare workers had her courage, my wife might still be alive." Maria Santos, whose father had died when understaffing delayed his emergency surgery, told the jury, "They want $500,000 from the woman who saved a life, while they saved money by letting my father die. What kind of justice is that?" Jimmy Torres, now a nursing student working part-time at a veterans hospital, testified about his recovery and career change inspired by Sarah's example. "She showed me what it means to put patients first, to stand up to administrators who value money more than lives. Every healthcare worker should have her courage." The hospital's defense collapsed when Mark Stevens testified about the blood that was available but withheld for VIP patients, supported by documentation Stone had obtained through federal subpoenas. They're suing her for $500,000 because she saved a life using blood they were saving for a politician's elective surgery, he told the jury. "That's not healthcare. That's a protection racket for wealthy and connected patients." The jury deliberated only 2 hours before finding for Sarah on all counts, rejecting the hospital's damage claims and awarding Sarah $750,000 in damages for malicious prosecution and defamation. Jury foreman David Martinez explained their decision. "This case was never about money or medical procedures. It was about intimidation and retaliation. The hospital tried to destroy someone for exposing their heartless policies that put profits before patients. But the real victory came when the Michigan Board of Nursing dismissed all charges against Sarah's license, citing new evidence of hospital malfeasance and systemic policy failures. Ms. Martinez's actions represent the highest ideals of nursing practice, the board stated. Her willingness to prioritize patient welfare over institutional policies exemplifies the professional nursing standards we expect from all practitioners. Richard Blackwood faced his own reckoning as the federal investigation resulted in criminal charges for healthcare fraud, patient endangerment, and conspiracy to defraud Medicare. He was terminated from his position and faced potential prison time of 10 to 15 years. His replacement, Dr. Maria Rodriguez, was a physician with 20 years of emergency medicine experience who immediately implemented patient-centered policies. Healthcare administration should support patient care, not obstruct it, she announced during her first press conference. We're reversing every policy that prioritizes profits over patients and implementing new protections for staff who advocate for patient welfare. The most satisfying development came when the hospital board, facing federal investigation and massive public relations damage, offered Sarah a position as Director of Patient Advocacy, with authority to override administrative policies that endangered patients. We want you to ensure that what happened to you never happens to another healthcare worker at this institution, Board Chairman William Chen explained. Your experience and commitment to patient welfare make you uniquely qualified to protect both patients and staff from administrative overreach. Sarah accepted the position with conditions that reflected the lessons of her ordeal. All staff members who had supported her must be restored to their original positions with back pay. The hospital must establish a $1 million fund for emergency blood supplies, and patient care protocols must be reviewed by medical staff rather than business administrators. General Patricia Hayes attended Sarah's reinstatement ceremony, presenting her with the Civilian Service Medal, the military's highest civilian honor. Ms. Martinez exemplifies the courage and compassion that defines the best of American healthcare and civilian support for our military personnel, Hayes stated before an audience of hundreds. The ceremony drew supporters from across the country, veterans, nurses, patients' rights advocates, and ordinary citizens who had followed Sarah's story and seen it as a symbol of individual courage, challenging institutional power. Danny Martinez, now thriving academically and proud of his aunt's vindication, introduced Sarah at the ceremony. My aunt taught me that doing right sometimes means standing up to powerful people who do wrong. She's my hero, but more importantly, she's everyone's hero because she proved that ordinary people can still defeat powerful institutions when they have courage and community support. Jimmy Torres, now in his second year of nursing school and working part-time under Sarah's mentorship, reflected on the journey that had brought them together. She saved my life twice, he explained to reporters. Once with her blood that night in the emergency room, and once by showing me what it means to serve others with courage and compassion. The story concluded with Sarah back in the emergency room, now with authority to override policies that endangered patients. When a homeless veteran arrived, needing expensive treatment that administrators might normally delay or deny, she personally ensured he received the same care as any VIP patient. Dr. Emily Chen, restored to her position and accepted to her Johns Hopkins Fellowship, worked alongside Sarah with new respect for nursing advocacy and patient rights. I learned that sometimes the right thing isn't the safe thing for your career, Chen reflected. Sarah taught all of us that lesson, and healthcare is better because of her courage. The final scene showed Sarah at home with Danny, who was now planning his own nursing career inspired by his aunt's example. They watched the evening news, where President Biden signed the Sarah Martinez Healthcare Worker Protection Act into law. Healthcare workers who prioritize patients over profits deserve protection, not prosecution, the president stated during the signing ceremony attended by Sarah, Jimmy Torres, and other healthcare advocates. Sarah turned off the television and looked at Danny, whose future now seemed bright with possibility and purpose. Ready for dinner? She asked. Yeah, Danny grinned. What are we having? Whatever we want, Sarah laughed. We've earned the right to choose. The camera pulled back through the window of their modest apartment, showing the Detroit skyline where St. Mary's Hospital now operated under new principles that put patient care first, always. The Sarah Martinez case led to federal healthcare worker protection laws, comprehensive hospital policy reforms, and renewed national emphasis on patient-centered care over profit maximization. Sarah continues as Director of Patient Advocacy, ensuring that saving lives never again becomes a criminal act. Jimmy Torres graduated nursing school with honors and works alongside his hero. Richard Blackwood was convicted of healthcare fraud and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Healthcare, at its best, puts people before policies and compassion before profit. In the end, one nurse's decision to save a life rather than follow deadly policies changed an entire system, proving that individual courage, supported by community determination, can still triumph over institutional corruption.